Yeah, I'm going to review finalizing the die line for our folding carton. The die line, after it is fully developed and we've tested it like we did, is the final specification drawing for a folding carton. After we made our samples and maybe made some modifications, we now know that this is going to work and it's ready to go. So we need to dimension it and use different line qualities to communicate how this will function. So once we built our 3D file, which we did before, and we separated all the surfaces and laid them out flat, and then we printed that to test. That worked out fine. But those surfaces need to be broken down into lines, so I can select each one of these lines and give it a certain quality. So I've gone through and did all of these. So what we need to do is you can check with your grayscale. So now this is showing up as a gray because it's a surface. We need to turn all of those lines into individual entities, separate lines. I did all of this was gray before, so I did all of these, but I want to show you how this works. You have to go through and get all these nice and clean and separated. So this is a surface. What can be helpful here is to go into display options and turn on points. It just gives us that little black dot at the end of each one of these so we can see what we're looking at. So I'm going to go back into wire mode so I can see a little more clearly these points. So if I go into my selection tool, so I'm under my selection tool, this is the pick entity, and that's an entire entity. As you can see over here, these are separate lines. That's what we want for everything. This particular one, I did not cut through that surface, so it's just sitting there as a line. So if you go to segment selection tool, and if I select that segment here, I can delete on the keyboard or I can use the garbage can icon. So I'm going to delete that. So that goes away. That took that and turned these into, see now those three lines are still connected. It's not a surface, but those lines are connected. And I definitely am going to make these lines have a different quality. So I need to separate those. So I'm going to go back to my line selection tool, select that and delete that. Now the lines went away. I need those lines. That's why it's helpful to have these points. Otherwise I wouldn't even see that point. So I'm going to go back in and draw those lines separately. And the only reason we're doing this is because when I built the 3D file, I built surfaces. It's much easier to deal with surfaces because we're going to map the graphics on it. So all of these things are kind of interplaying with one another's rendering and 3D files and die lines and all these kinds of things. So now if I go back to this gray shaded mode, everything is separate. And you can go in and go back to entities, full entities, and you can select these things. And these are all separated. So everything should be nice and clean. So what we're going to do now is turn these lines into things that we want, or look the way we want to look. So I'm going to select all of these on. Hold the shift key down, and I'm going to select all of these outside edges. These are the cutting edges. So I'm going to make these dark. It's sort of like using line weights to communicate what the line means. There are lots of processes where they use color. They use color to delineate what the different lines are. A lot of that is used with artwork. So when you get a die line from an engineer, it might be in color. I like to do everything in black and white, because quite often these things will get printed quickly and transferred, and I want to be able to communicate what I'm doing without color. So that's just a preference. It's all good. Okay, so I selected all of those lines, which are cutting edges. So I got the circles, I got my little cut for the tab, and I am good. So I'm going to go under Inspector, and I want to go under, we have line and edges, we have color. I'm going to leave that black. We have style, and then we have line weight. So here, I want to make this a heavier line weight. It's a little bit arbitrary. Sometimes I go really punchy to make, because it actually visually looks quite nice. So I'm going to do this kind of in a mellow way. So let's do 3. Here, visually on the screen, it's pretty bold, especially if I go into this other mode. That's not too bad. Yes, that looks good. All right, so that's that. So now I want to select all these other lines on the inside. These are going to be, I'm going to do these as dashed lines. There's many ways to do this, just as long as they look different and it's clear what we're talking about. So these are going to be all the folds. I guess I could just put all these things on different layers. That would make it a little bit easier. But I think this will work. One more. Okay. So I'm going to go back into Inspector, same area, and I'm going to go under Style, and I'm going to do a dash line. There's several different dash lines. It's kind of small, and some of this does change. Oops, wrong one. Some of this does change when you print it out. Okay, doesn't even look any different. Okay. All right, so now we have this. So now we're starting to see what's going on. What's a fold and what is a cut edge? Since I do have some arcs and circles that align, these circles align with one another, I'm going to put some center lines in here. So I'm going to go to my drawing tool, and I'm just going to snap to the center. So I'm snapping to the center of this point here. I'm going to come over, go past the object slightly, and then I'm going to select that, and I'm going to move it, make sure I'm guided by my grid. I'm going to move that side, just make it extend. Oops. Oh, it's not locked. Here we go. I didn't have my horizontal lock on. So we don't want it to look like it's part of the object, so we extend it a little. I'm only doing a little bit because I got a whole series of dimensions and other things going on, but just enough to say that it's not part of the object. So I'm snapping to the middle of this arc up here, and I'm going to go extend a little bit beyond the object. Select that, move that about like this. Now these two lines are center lines. So I want to give it a center line. Under Style, we have center lines. I'm going to pick the second one. It's just it's a dash dot, long dash, short dash. That communicates center line, kind of a line language that engineers use. Okay, so this is my line weights. And the only way I could do that was to separate all those, so I can keep that separate. And it's also beneficial to separate all those when we export into other formats. We can't export directly into Illustrator, but we can export as a DXF. DXF reads 3D data from the top view only, so don't draw your die line from the front view. And if you export it as a DXF, you'll just get one big line because it's looking at it from the top view. So you always look at it from the top view when you do it in 3D. So when you save out a DXF and bring it into Illustrator, it will read it. For this exercise, we're just going to export this as a JPEG. So we have a nice clear image of what our die line looks like. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to top view and let's save. Always save. Form Z and other programs sometimes will just shut that notice. Form Z does save a backup file. And sometimes if something goes wrong, Form Z will ask, do you want to save this? Like it's having a conflict. And he goes, shutting down, do you want to save? You can say yes. And there's a dialog box. When you go back to open Form Z, and if you're lucky, it'll be in there. Quite often it does work, but sometimes it'll shut down and without any warning and nothing happens. It's kind of disappointing. Okay, so here's our die line. So now we need to do dimensions. So dimensions will be under project settings. This is where I gave you the tutorial about setting things up, setting up your working units. You have that set at 3 places. And there's other things you can work on here, your appearance, your backgrounds, and how things look. But we're going to go to the dimensions right now. So I have this set up. I will send out a image of these specifications, but it does vary. It's not going to be the same for everything. It depends on the scale. This particular one, I'm using 1/4 inch height on my copy, somewhat small for this size. And you can pick a typeface. This one is standard. I use this all the time. You can text between the witness lines. It means it goes, you'll see that it goes right in the center. Include units. In this case, I'm using inches. I like horizontal on screen at all times. I don't like turning blueprints around to read dimensions because they're oriented differently, so I keep that the same. Arrowheads, they call them terminators, which is the at the end of your dimension line. What do you want? Architects use a slash line. Sometimes they use circles and other things like that. I'm using a filled arrow on both of these, and I can determine the size of that filled arrow. So I have this on here for both of them, start and end. Witness line is the line that comes off of the object and goes by the arrowhead. It shows where the dimension line is going to. I have start and end. Offset from the object. How far away from the object is that witness line? I don't like to have it right on the object, just slightly off, but make it very clear where it's coming from. Extension is the witness line past the arrowhead or past the terminator, depending on what you're using. We have our whole file in 3 decimal points. And the reason I do that is because it's very clear and it's extremely accurate for snapping objects together. So for building, that's very important to do that. But for dimensioning, I don't want to put 3 decimal points. That's extremely finite, much, much too small. So I'm going to use this custom version for my units. It's the same dialog box that we used before. But here, when I do my dimensions, I only want 2 decimal points. I want it to round up to the 2 decimal points. So you can set that up there. So that's how that works. So let's start dimensioning part of this. Let's see here. Normally it's under text right here. It's above that little vase looking thing. So if you click on text, here are all your dimensioning features. And the text happens to be here too, but we're just going to work with the dimensioning part right now. So linear dimension, that's the one you're going to use most of the time. So once you set that up, you can click. I'm going to click the width of this. And I'm snapping, make sure everything is snapping to your point. So I'm going to come down here because I need a little bit of space for a few things in here. Okay, so you just click, and I'm just going to back out slightly. And there's that dimension. So this is a little bit of a back and forth to get this right. Sometimes you'll do some dimensions and it looks great, everything's fine, but then when you start adding more dimensions on top of it, things get in the way and it's overlapping and it gets confusing. So you will find yourself deleting and redoing and moving and things like that. It's a little bit of trial and error, but I think you'll be able to work it out. So now I'm going to dimension some of these other features in here. So let's see. I'm going to start here. So you see my center line is right over that file. I might want to correct that because I have some other dimensions that I'm going to put in here. So let's say I do that. Go back to linear. Say I want to do these. So already I'm going to get a little crowded in here. And I would like to snap to that, get all these to line up like this. And I'm going to snap to these points here. So I have that area. I'm going to line up all 3 of those. So I do have these little surfaces in here. I could do all that, but I would need a little more space, or I could do it off to the side, but then my arrowhead will be on the object. So it's a little bit of back and forth to figure out what you need to show that. And every project is going to be different, depends on your shape. And some things you can let go, because I do have a center line, and I'm going to delineate some of these arcs and the distances of these arcs. So there's lots of ways to back into this. At the end of the day, when you deliver a final die line, you will have a DXF file, and that's more like an engineering file. like a 3D data file that they can bring in to their for their cutting tables and some of the software that they use. So as designers, we want to show our design intent. It's important that we show these details. These certain arcs obviously are extremely important because they line up with the art. But we're also giving a die line to the graphic designer. So it is delineated there also. So there are several checks and balances. So this is just an overview on how to document some of these things. So that's linear dimensions. Obviously, we have curves and arcs. So we have this R, radial diameter or radius. So all we have to do is just click on these. And it gives you, now I'm not really sure where to put this because I forget. I have this whole thing done and I'll show you what it looks like. So I'm just saying you can move it around. And like I said, you might start doing some other dimensions and this thing's in the way. So you might move it and do it somewhere else. So this one, I might, maybe it's better over here. I'm not really sure at this point. So I'm just going to put that in there. Those arrowheads are nice and clean. This big one, same type of detail. So wherever that might go, I'm not sure. I can put that there. So that's it. That's linear and radial. And you just need to dimension the whole thing. So it's starting to come along nicely. So when it's done, let me show you how this is completed. And we put a border. So many DL8. And here we go. So let's just bring that in. So here I have all the line qualities and the dimensions. See here I have a dimension inside of the object. It's not the end of the world, but it's not common practice. If I had more space or if I wanted to, I could have pulled that straight up in here, which I could have done. I could have moved this over a little bit, but it's fine. So you see how this radius dimension fits inside of that one. Here I put it down on the bottom and did other dimensions up here. So it's a matter of getting all the, here, this is not correct. This one's like over this line right here. I should actually move that over or bring it down into another location. Because we do not want that witness line over the number like that. So that should be corrected. Okay, so this is how this all works. I think here I did this a little differently down here. So what we need to do is create a border. So all this is building a square or a rectangular shape. But what's critical is the size. I estimated all these dimensions, and then I put a border around it. I like to do it so if I were to print this out full size, I could fold this up into approximately an 8.5 by 11 format. I like to use that. So 8.5 by 11, if it's a tiny little object, is great. 11/17 is perfect. Fold that in half, and it fits nicely in a brochure, and I can hand that out for a meeting. This particular one got kind of big, so I'm still working with the module. So I did 22 by 17 because that folds up very nicely to 8.5 by 11. It's folded in half twice. So I did that, and it gave me enough space to get this to work. So I used that dimension. So what you do is two-dimensional. You make your border. And since I'm in this gray mode, it's coming out gray. So I don't want that. So select this object, go into Inspector. And if you go under Attributes, you can get rid of all of this stuff, which makes it an object. The big one is Render as Shaded Surface. So if you deselect that, it just becomes a linear box. Now, I made it this big, and then obviously we want to have a border in here. So we want to select that. So if you go under Derive Tool, and I pick 2D wall. So this is going to create a 2D wall here. I have it 3/8 left or right means inside or outside. I can never remember which is which. I always do trial and error. Okay, that went in. This is obviously really small, but I just want to show you how it creates that, that border effect. So what we want to do is I want to make that inside line black. So what I'm going to do is select, this is a chain of segments, not individual segments. It's the little round thing. So by doing this, I'm selecting all of those, and I'm selecting all of the inside ones. I'm going to derive those segments, and let's put it on join, see if it works. It didn't work, or is it still there? Hold on. Yeah, it's still there. So let's unghost, just trying to separate these lines. So now if I go to object, I should have the inside is separated from the outside now, but it's exactly at that 3 inches. So if I select the inside, just like doing the line qualities, I'm going to come over here and go into line weight. This I make really punchy. So let's do like 5 or something. So it's a really bold. So that's how I create the border. My points are back on, so I'm not sure when that happened. Display. So I had points on, it's just easier to draw. So I'm going to turn them off right now. We don't need them. I'm going to get rid of my little border here. We don't need this. Okay, so now I know that this page is exactly 22 by 17. So we need to save this out, and I need to know it's exactly that scale. So if you go into display images, image options, here you can set this up to size and resolution. So here I have the 22 by 17, 300 DPI is a good resolution to do all of these. I say okay. So that's this page now. So if I go up to this little square with the 4 little arrows and I go fit, that is now exactly that size. And if I save this out as DXF, if I save it out as anything, it will be exactly this size. So we're going to just save out a JPEG to do this. One other detail here is the title block. So I just drew some lines here to delineate that title block. I did that after I typed everything in. So what you do is to start that, you go to Notes. It's got that little pin-up thing. And you just click into space. This dialog box comes up, and I can type whatever I want here. Once you have the note, you select the note, and you go into the inspector, and you go into the parameters. And then here is that same dialog box. So that's how you modify it. I'm not using the text tool. That's more for building 3-dimensional text. This is more for our drafting area here. So let's take a look at this. So this can be done in many, many ways, depending on what we want to talk about and what kind of information. So this is a typical scenario. The client, the project, part, material, it's 15-point SBS board, printing, 2 sides for this particular one, who drew it, scale, date. There could be a whole series of different things in there. You don't have to get too involved with all the nuances, but some of the big stuff. Like I had mentioned, when I'm making these die lines, I'm doing the inside of the carton because of how I create these die lines. So the dies and the scores are accurate. When you have artwork, when I send this over to a graphic designer, I flip it. So it's the outside. So the graphic designer knows that they're working on the printed side. This particular one is printed inside and out. So this does work. It's for the inside. But I'll discuss that with the graphic designers to make sure it's really clear. So go back to fit. We don't want our grid and our center line. So we under display, we can turn those off. So now it's a nice clean page. We could add additional notes and features, even a little picture of the box if we wanted, open, close. That can be very helpful. So that's setting up the specification drawing. So now you just have to save this out. For our purposes, I would just save it out as a JPEG for now, and you can use that for presentation and for showing the rest of the students in the class. So you go to export image, and we have all these image options here. I know it says Illustrator, but it's not as smooth as it looks. So this one I'm going to save out as a JPEG. So it's just a picture. I have all my die lines in here, and I have this one here. It's my final die line. So you just save that out as a picture, and it's ready to go. So that's That's setting up your specification drawing.